Good morning from San Carlos Lake in Arizona. We've got a super fishing morning here today. And my guest today is a touring pro, Bassmaster Classic qualifier, winner of the first U.S. Open held on Lake Mead, and just a super fine gentleman, Mr. Greg Hines. Greg, it's great to be out here today.
Hey, it's a great morning this morning, Pat. I'm just glad to be here.
It's unusual to get a day like this in the desert. We got overcast, it's cool, it feels great, and I think we're going to catch some big fish today.
I've heard stories of some big fish coming out of here all this year, so we got a good chance to catch a good one.
Well, I've heard that the new state record came out of here back in April of this year, 15 pounds and something, so hopefully maybe his brother's still swimming out here.
I want his mom.
But I think we're going to have some super fishing here today. We're going to catch them on a crankbait here early this morning, and then maybe go to some worms, some jigs, some plastic. So you stick with us. I think you're going to like this today. Pieces of brush out off the end of this. We may have to get in a little tighter. Those fish may have got real shallow on us last night.
Yeah, they could still be shallow up feeding on some crawdads this early in the morning like this.
The inside of this little point here, I think it's got some rock on it, on this left-hand side. That crawdad pattern crankbait's liable to do a number on it.
Yeah, slide us in here where we can get some good shots in there. And you know, I found it's real important, Pat, to keep the crankbaits in contact with the bottom. When you hit stuff, it causes the bait to stop and start and dart off different directions, and it's really effective in, you know, getting the fish to react to the bait.
Yeah.
Well, Pat, I can feel my bait bouncing down through those little stick-ups and a few rocks in there. It's an awful good little corner here.
Yeah, there's some good stuff right along in here.
You know, something I've learned in fishing crankbaits a lot, Pat, is I always, when I'm fishing it, it's very important to feel the bait bouncing over the stuff, and probably the biggest factor is keeping that rod away from me. A lot of times I get lazy and put the rod in here, right, but boy, it sure deadens the feel. So I try to keep it away from me where I can get a real good feel of that bait bouncing through the structure there.
Yeah, if you can keep that bait bouncing around on stuff, it just produces better like that right there.
Oh, there's a rock.
Did you get bit?
There. No, there's a rock. I just got excited seeing you catch one.
Well, this one's not very big, but it's a bass.
All right, we're starting out. Oh, he didn't look that bad.
Just mean little San Carlos fish.
Well, look at the coloration of him, Pat. He just doesn't have the real pretty stripes right now, does he?
No. Well, this water being as off-colored as it is. Fish look a little white.
That's a nice little
small
bass.
Fish, but we got to start.
Oh yeah, got to start somewhere.
They'll get better. Another small fish.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, we had a double on. That's a good one you got.
Yeah, I got a little bit better fish.
A little better fish.
You gonna get him for me?
Yeah, I'm gonna get him as soon as he gets
Don't get one of those
calmed down a little
there.
bit. Settle down, big boy.
Yeah, that's a nice little San Carlos bass. Let me grab a hold of him where I can't get those hooks to me here.
Well, he ate that little crawdad bait.
Yeah, he popped it right there at the boat. I only had like 3 or 4 foot of line out.
He was hot there for a minute.
Yeah, when he doesn't get to fight too much. That's a nice little bass.
Pretty little fish. Boy, those fish are nice, fat, and healthy now.
You know, that fish was off the bank a little bit more, Pat. He's hit way out here by the boat, and we're sitting here in about 6 foot of water. I could feel it bouncing through the rocks and trees, and as soon as it came free, I reeled about 2 times, and whack, he's on it.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, sorry. Pat, that fish that you caught, were you starting or stopping to retrieve?
Yeah,
or?
I was just running it a few feet and then hesitating with it, and that's when that bite came, was right when I stopped that bait. He jumped all over it.
You know, that's something that's really a factor sometimes, is the starting and stopping, you know, because what happens, the bait's cruising along, it stops, and the fish comes up behind it, and it takes off, and it causes them to react.
Right.
And so sometimes that's the key to catching more fish on a crankbait. What, did you get some old fishing line there?
Yeah, I gathered up somebody's string down there. We'll save that for another day. This lake has been pounded primarily by the Gila River, right?
Yeah, the Gila and the San Carlos River, it's mostly a rain-fed lake. You know, this lake doesn't get a lot of snow melt at all. It's mostly rainwater.
It's a pretty fertile piece of water, though. It seems to produce some really quality fish.
You know, we all dread when it's down low like this, but I tell you, when this grass starts growing on these points and water comes back up over it, it really produces a lot of fish. It really makes it fertile, and that's what makes this lake such a great lake.
Very few facilities on this lake. Actually, there's not any.
Yeah, you know, Pat, though, it really makes it nice in one sense that there's not people everywhere on the lake. And
what do you say, Greg? Let's swing out to our right and we'll go up this bank right here. We got a river channel right here off to our right. Maybe those fish have moved up out of that river channel.
yeah, I can see a little point, little rocky point that comes out. Looks like it might be a good spot up there. Very similar to what we've caught these fish off of.
Got a lot of old foundations on these points out here. And this is a big mud flat out here, but you can see these rock piles. And a lot of these rock piles extend on out in the water here, and these fish are keying on this rock. Coming up out of this river channel here on our right, we've got just perfect watercolor out here today. You can see about a foot in this water. Fish ought to be shallow, and they ought to be fairly active here with this overcast hanging in.
Yeah, a couple of the casts I made, I saw shad jump out of the water when the bait hit the water, so it tells you that the shad are up there pretty shallow.
Yeah. Well, I'm ready to make contact with old big lips. Any cast.
Ooh, man, some of those rocks feel awful good when that crankbait bounces off one of them.
You run that crankbait down through there, deflect it off of those rocks or these sticks, that's when that strike generally comes.
Yeah, it's crankbait, the rule of thumb is always to keep it in contact with something. Well, some of those rocks feel pretty good, don't they, Pat?
Yes, it does.
It's really, really important to keep that bait in contact with things. What it does when it's down there, that bait hits a rock and it stops momentarily, then it accelerates off and it causes a darting action. And a lot of times that will key a reaction strike out of the bass.
They think that bait's trying to get away from them.
Oh yeah, it's a reaction, and that's very important to keep that bait in contact with stuff.
I'd like to make contact with the inside lip of about a 10-pounder. That'd make me feel pretty good.
You and me both, I tell you.
These fish aren't cooperating with us very well right now.
Well, I think we just got to keep moving, and we'll find areas that have a lot of them and probably areas that have none. But you know, that's an important thing. It's all trial and error. Nobody can really come to a lake and say, this is a key spot, and fish it. You know, you try it, you try fast, slow retrieves, vary things, change your depth, and we're looking for the fish. You know, a good key we might look at right here, Pat, is see that blue heron over in the corner there? I just watched him get a couple shad there, and so that's telling us that there's probably shad swimming the shoreline. So a lot of times under those conditions, I'll change and maybe go to a rattle trap or something like that and fish out 1 foot, 2 foot of water and get up a little bit shallower yet. In this dirty water and this overcast like this, those fish aren't afraid to be shallow at all. They'll be right up in there.
But you've had a lot of success in tournaments fishing crankbaits. How do you go about selecting out of the hundreds of baits that a guy carries in his tackle box? Store shelves are full of them. How do you go about selecting the right bait?
Well, there's several things you want to look at in a crankbait. Color is probably the most obvious, and I'm very basic. Normally our lakes have a lot of shad in them, so if the water's clear, I'll lean towards the shad colors. If it's dingy water, I'll use either a dark brown color or something like that, or the chartreuse colors. And so that's my basic starting on colors. The next thing would be the depth. Very important, just call ahead or look for keys on the lake of how deep the fish are. And so if I'm going to fish 2 foot of water, I'll maybe use a lipless, a rattle trap type bait. Or if I'm going to fish on an outside point in 15 to 20 foot of water, I might use a Bill Norman DD22 or something like that. And so you got to use the right depth, or the right bait for the right depth is the key. And that's the two major factors there. You know, something that's important in all of this type of fishing is more of a trial and error thing, and I've noticed you use a number of different retrieves here today, Pat. You've been steady retrieves, you've jerked it, you stopped it. You know, retrieves very, very important on, you know, finding out what the fish want. I sort of go with the attitude of, I'll let the fish tell me. And as soon as I catch one fish, I'm gonna, you got one there? I'm gonna try to duplicate exactly what I did, whether I stopped it, started it, fast, slow, and duplicate that movement, and normally you're gonna catch more fish that way.
Well, I found over the years that normally with a crankbait, I have a better success ratio when I've got an erratic type retrieve. A lot of start and stop.
It keeps that reaction bite. That's a big factor in crankbaits.
We got us a nice rock pile right here we're coming up on. This ought to hold one.
Yeah, I can feel that Norman crankbait just bouncing right down through the rocks. It's so important to keep that contact and feel. A little thing that really helps me a lot in feeling a crankbait, if you point your rod straight at it, you have no feel at all. So I try to get a little bit of an angle so you can watch my rod tip there, and it's bouncing through the rocks, and you can really get a good feel by having a little bit of an angle on your rod there. It's just so important. A lot of times I use basically my crankbait as my depth finder, because I can feel it, and when it comes off of a ledge, it just all of a sudden is free. And so you know there's a ledge there, and so you can target a couple more casts right in that immediate area. A lot of times when we're fishing the smallmouth bass, I've had them hit the bait 3 and 4 and 5 times and just keep casting back in there, casting. You feel them bump the bait, and eventually they'll get hooked. You know, but if you weren't paying attention and could feel those fish, you'd have never known he was there hitting at the bait, and you just went on down the bank and probably not caught that fish. So it's just so important to learn to feel that crankbait. You know, that's your eyes right there bouncing in those rocks.
You know, this lake is located, what, about 2.5 hours from the metropolitan Phoenix area. And I'm just amazed. You think about the desert and think about Phoenix, you don't really think about fishing. But there's a lot of good water around this Phoenix area. A lot of good lakes.
We have some great lakes in this state. You know, the thing about it, Pat, they're all flood control lakes. And so they go way, way down like this is now, then it'll flood and come back up. But when it floods, all those nutrients that are brought into the lake with all of the decaying vegetation and everything that gets down in here just makes it so fertile. And that's why there's a lot of fish in our lakes. He hit that thing.
Boy, he nailed it, didn't he?
I just coming through the brush, working it real slow, and boy, he popped it.
That's a good bass.
Well, these treble hooks on this Norman, those Gamakatsus, you really gotta stay clear of them. Scares me to death when you get a bass shaking around with the treble hooks. Nice little San Carlos bass there. Look, he's got a mark on his side.
Yeah.
You know what that's from? A lot of times these blue herons or something like that, the fish are up there feeding in the shallows, and they swim by one of those blue herons, and he'll try to make him a meal too.
Well, he was hot when he hit it, wasn't he?
Oh yeah, he came flying out of that water. He's right down in the bottom and a nice slow retrieve, so we'll try to duplicate that a little bit here. Get it down in there bouncing in those sticks and rocks, and see if we can get another one to hit it. You know, Pat, a technique that I've learned from tournament fishing that really helps a lot in producing more fish for crankbait fishermen is if you keep the bait parallel to the shoreline. A lot of times when you're throwing a crankbait, this bait will only go down probably 8 or 10 feet, and you throw it to the bank and it comes down to that 8 or 10 foot zone, then you're out in deep water where you're not gonna catch the fish.
Right.
And so what I try to do is move the boat in where the boat's sitting in that 8 or 10 foot and throw parallel to the shoreline, then the bait's in productive water the whole time, and it really increases the number of fish you can catch on a crankbait.
What kind of equipment, as far as your rod is concerned, do you prefer when you're running these deep crankbaits?
Well, on a lot of different crankbaits, I use different rods. Something a few years ago, or quite a few years ago, we used to use the glass rods for the crankbaits. And basically the reason we did is for the landing the fish percentage. But now the companies like Quantum have produced such good graphite rods that we don't need to go to the glass rods really, because the graphite gives me a lot better feel. and I got the actions I need in the rods. This one happens to be a 7.5 foot cranking rod, and you can see I got a nice soft tip to it. And when those fish come flying out of the water with that crankbait, you won't lose very many of them. And so the equipment is very important. If I'm going to a lighter crankbait and fishing shallower water, a little bitty 1/4 ounce crankbait or something, I'll go down to maybe a 6.5 or 7 foot medium light action rod to get the right rod where I can cast the bait and it performs well. But the rod, you're right, the rod is a major factor in, you know, how many fish you land.
Well, you got a lot less weight with these new graphite rods versus those old glass rods were pretty heavy.
Yeah.
They take their toll on you during the day.
Yeah, the glass rod was just totally function of landing a higher percentage of fish because it was nice and soft and it didn't jerk the hooks out of the fish when they jumped and stuff. And so that's all it was good for. Feel, the graphite's way better in the sensitivity area. We do have a gorgeous morning. Great day to fish. The fishing hadn't been great yet so far, but
it's going to get good.
We haven't covered the whole lake yet either.
Well, if we can't get them to go on this crankbait, we'll just change up and catch them on something else.
Yeah, this watercolor, we might, you know, be better off slowing down and dragging some plastic baits, maybe a jig and pig, maybe a Carolina rig lizard, something like that. Yeah. Slowing down a little bit might produce a few more bites for us. Well, looks like we're learning a little bit here on, you know, we came down this and got a few bites and we turned around and fished it real thorough coming back and haven't got a bite yet. So maybe it's a one-way ticket today.
Might be.
Yeah, it just seems like there's a few up there aggressive and...
I got one running out here under the boat with it.
Uh-oh. Whoa, there he goes.
I kept thinking, I've lost my jig. I've lost my jig.
Whoa.
Hello.
Nice little fish there.
He's hot.
Looks like he was down about 10 or 12 feet, wasn't he?
Yeah, that fish was down a little bit deeper. A little bit deeper. Boy, he swallowed that jig too. Whew. He's a mean little bass. Get him right up here. Come on now, you're not that big and mean.
Nice fish, Pat.
It's bigger than your last one, right?
No, I didn't say that now.
Oh, look how big that thing is. No, he won't quite do it.
It's pretty close to the same size.
He won't quite do it.
Boy, he's got it down in his throat, doesn't he?
Yeah, get him out.
I think I got a set of pliers here, Pat, if you want to reach down in there with them. Real subtle bite on that, Pat?
Mm-hmm. Real subtle. Pretty nice San Carlos bass.
Yeah,
So.
Nice little chunker there.
Oh, they're healthy. These fish are fat. Well, I think I'm going to tie on a little bit lighter head this time.
I don't know. You can't quit on success now. Better stick with the same game.
Oh, yeah, but I got to get a bigger one.
Now, we know the jig and pig's going to catch the big one. Now, I can't change since you made that bet. I got to stick with the big fish bait.
Greg, you fished a lot of years, tournament fished, won a lot of tournaments. What in your mind is your most memorable day of fishing? Anything that really sticks out?
Well, I think it'd probably have to be a day I was all by myself down Lake Okeechobee and I was pre-fishing for a tournament. And I'd always heard about all the big fish in Okeechobee, and I got out in this little island down there with all the water hyacinths, and I caught so many 6, 7, 8 pound fish. My big fish was like 10.2 that day that I weighed, and I had nobody there to share it with. I had probably some of the best fish I've ever caught, where I caught 10 or 12 fish between 5 and 10 pounds.
My goodness.
You know, and it was quite a memorable day fishing wise for me, but you know, you don't have anybody to share it with, or pictures or stories, you know, so you just sort of keep it in your own memory log. But
What was your best win? What tournament made you feel the best about the way you performed? And
well, I don't know. That's a hard one to say. Probably the one where I won the U.S. Bass World Championship down in Tawakoni, Texas. Because I was on a lake that I'd never fished before, and all the people in the tournament were from Ricky Clunn to Gary Klein to all the top fishermen, and I managed to beat them in basically their home water in Texas. So that made me feel real good and gave me a lot of confidence.
I fished that tournament. I remember you winning that tournament. That was a tough little lake to fish too.
Yeah, it was. It was a real tough little lake, and to this day, I remember one of the key things about that, and it might be a good thing to mention here, is that the reason I won that tournament, and I just sort of figured out by luck that to catch the fish, like if there's a log laying in the water, I would make as many as 15 casts to that log and finally get bit. And it was just repetitive casts, the same exact spot, time and time again, and finally they'd bite. And it was only in 1.5 feet, 2 feet of water, but it was a thing of repetitive casts is what was the whole key to catching them.
Well, that was exactly the way I caught mine. I had one brush pile, I think, that taught me how to catch those fish, and I was throwing a jerkbait over it, and there was 3 or 4 foot over the top of it, and I had thrown in that spot so several times. It was just one of those places when you look at it, you know a bass lives there.
Yeah, there's somebody home.
And I just got hard-headed. I kept firing that thing in there, and I think it was my 10th or 12th cast, and boy, he come up right out of that bush and nailed it.
Yeah.
And I thought, there's something to this.
Yeah, that's the way I won the tournament, repetitive casts on the key little spots, bushes and logs. And it's sometimes you just, things happen, and on your 10th cast you catch one, you go, those other spots I fished, I only cast 2 or 3 times, I better go fish those again.
Right.
And I'd turn around and go back there and just sit there and cast and cast and cast. Oh, there's one. And that's the way it went the whole day. Just
what it seems like is, regardless of how many years you do this, you never stop learning.
Oh yeah.
I mean, every day you learn a new twist, a new way to do it.
Probably one of the more memorable lessons I ever learned in fishing, it was during the tournament conditions at Alamo Lake here in Arizona. And I was fishing along, and it was in the fall, October, November, and the fish were schooling out in the lake. And I was fishing the points, and these big schools of bass would come up behind me, just blowing and going, shad flying everywhere. And man, I was throwing my Zara spook out there, and I was working it every way I knew how. They wouldn't touch it. And I mean, I hit like 4 or 5 schools of fish and have yet to get a bite. I'm getting pretty frustrated now. And a school comes up, boy, and I can see 3-pounders jumping out there, and I wound up and threw as hard as I could, got this gigantic backlash. Boy, that made my day. I'm sort of going, but the bait's setting out there. Kaboom! Boy, I reload my backlash and catch me a 3-pounder. And I go, they just told me what they wanted. So from the rest of that day, I'd throw it out there, chug, 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 and just let it sit there in the water. It might sit there 20, 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Boom, they got it. And I ended up winning that tournament by making that backlash, but the most important thing, I let the fish tell me how they wanted to eat the bait. And I don't think I'll ever forget that lesson.
Well, Greg, I know there's a lot of our viewers out there that would probably give anything to do what you do for a living. But having done it myself, there's a few things out there that it's not as easy as it looks. And it demands a lot out of a person. What are some of the things that, as far as tournament fishing is concerned, that you like about it, and maybe 2 or 3 of them that don't set too well with you?
Well, I just feel I'm the luckiest person in the world to get to do this for a living, and I've got to fish all over the United States, from Canada to Florida. Just tremendous experience, and I have friends almost in every state in the United States. So I've just been super lucky to do that. The fishing experience has been, you just couldn't duplicate them doing what we're doing. But, the downside of it is the traveling, and it's sort of funny because when we first start out, traveling and seeing all the new parts of the country and different things was the funnest part, and then it becomes the oldest part. It gets old pretty quick. But the new lakes and experiencing different things in the fishing world is probably the best part of it. I've really had a great time doing it. Of
all the benefits of tournament fishing, I think that the camaraderie and the friendships that you build out there are probably the best of all of it. And I know you and Ken Cook have been close friends for a number of years. You guys hunt a lot together. You do a lot together.
Yeah,
And,
the friendships are probably the biggest thing we take with us, and the experiences and sharing them with our friends.
you got an opportunity to do a couple of those tournaments down around Disney World with the race car drivers too, haven't you?
Yeah.
You won one of those, in fact, didn't you?
Jeff Gordon and I won. The very first fish he ever caught in his life was out of the back of my boat. And since that time, Jeff's become quite a known NASCAR star. And I'm going to go back down this December and fish with him a few days down in Florida. There we go. Oh, I lost him. Don't say that. It's not in a tournament. Doesn't matter if we lose him or not, does it?
Well, you get him back.
That was probably a worse job right there.
Probably was.
He's right on that corner, right where he should have been. I dropped it down in there. It went ka-dunk. I felt that one bite, Pat. But boy, I don't know how I lost him. I thought I had a hook set on him.
I thought you did too.
But those big old bass, sometimes that hook finds a hard spot and it's hard to get it in them.
Well, you have to be pretty versatile out there, I know, Greg, but all of us have our favorite way to catch them. Mm-hmm. If you could pull up on any body of water, tie on something that you really like to throw, what's that you're going to be tying on?
Well, Pat, I'd have to go with the topwater bait. I just like the excitement of the strike, and by doing it, it's sort of an unknown. All of a sudden, boom, and something's happening, and it's exciting, and that's probably the funnest for me. You know,
it's fun to watch them come up and get it.
Oh yeah, buzz baits, chuggers, different things. It's just really the funnest of all the bass fishing for me.
I've had two experiences that I've witnessed when I was bass fishing. One of them was in a little town of Oklahoma on a park lake. And you know how the chimney sweeps will come out in the afternoon, they'll come down and dip down on the water and get a drink?
Uh-huh.
And I just happened to be focusing. I was probably only about 12 or 13 years old, and I was focusing towards the back of this lake. Just as this chimney sweep comes down to get his drink, and this bird is this high off the water, and this big old bass just come up and took that bird right out of the air. I mean, he was there 1 minute and gone the next.
Oh, that had to have been a great, great thing to see.
And then years ago, my brother was casting an old Heading Sonic.
Mm-hmm,
and we were on a little farm pond, and he had it on a spinning rod, and he must have made a cast that looked like it was 200 yards long, had a big rainbow in it, and I was watching that Sonic go up through the air, and the very same thing happened. That Sonic was 3 or 4 foot off the water. That bass come right out and took that Sonic right out of the air.
Oh, they have great vision. There's no doubt about that. One of the funniest things that had happened, just happened to me last week on Lake Mead. It was during a tournament again, which most of my fishing is tournament fishing. And I throw my little chugger and it got hung in a salt cedar bush. And so here I am going da-da-da, saying bad words and jerking on it, trying to jerk it out of the bush. And it's about this high out of the water. And every time I jerk it, whips it over and hits the water. About the 4th time, and it just stayed in the water. And all of a sudden, and the fish takes off with it. And he was sitting there watching me jerk on that thing. When it hit the water, he just snarfed that thing right off that tree limb. And it was one I weighed in a tournament. So
you did get the fish,
Oh
huh?
yeah, I caught him. And I was pretty proud of that. A lot of skill involved in that. But that was one pattern I couldn't duplicate during the day.
Couldn't find enough bushes to get hung in.
Oh, I got hung in plenty of them, just the fish weren't there.